Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Wildlife Photo Chat Podcast. It's Ray Hennessy here. Got you a great show today. An absolute wonderful guest. Had such a fun conversation. But before I get into introducing her, just a quick update what I've been up to. Not much photography-wise since the last episode I recorded, which I think I only recorded a couple days ago, so there hasn't been much in between. That's kind of how it goes with recording these. I sometimes have long breaks in between, and other times I kind of do them a little bit more back to back. So I don't have a ton to update you on, but I can say outside of photography, the actual going out and taking the photos part, I've been doing a lot of other stuff behind the scenes. I got some other projects in the works. Stay tuned to the end. I'll tell you a little bit more about one of them there. But yeah, just some fun new content for you guys. I'll give you that up front here. But that's kind of about it. Been putting more effort into that. I've just been, honestly, I haven't had a lot of motivation to do photography and get out on my own. You know, I'm shooting almost every day with work, but just anytime I do have free time, I just haven't had too much motivation to get out and do some shooting on my own. So I have some. It's one of my favorite places to photograph shorebirds is going to start being viable soon. And by that, I mean the birds are going to start returning to the area, shorebirds migrating south in the fall. And so I'm already looking forward to that. So I know I'm going to get that urge to get back out there and do some of my own creative shooting soon. But until then, I think I'm just going to sit tight, get some work done, and try and put out more content like this for you guys. So let me jump into today's guest. Today I'm really excited to have Marianne Karen on. Just an amazingly thoughtful, creative, and all around great photographer. She's only been shooting a little bit over a year, but already has such a vision for what she's doing and is just putting out some incredible photos, just very eye-catching, spacious. And we talk about that. You know, we started the conversation talking about her diving into macro photography for the first time and just playing with that and a little bit of why and how she's been enjoying that. So that was really cool. And then we talk about incorporating surprise into her photography. And I don't want to describe too much more about that. I'll let you listen to the show, but it's a great concept. And I love how that word came up over and over again in this episode. I think it was a very apt word for how it connected to her photography, and I could certainly relate to it as well, and did. But we talked about her use of space, which is one of the things that really stands out to me. Space, color, composition, and light. Like those four ingredients she just puts together in such a wonderfully unique way. So we definitely touched on that. And then we kind of wrapped up the conversation talking about how she is planning and hoping to get started on a conservation project connected to the Great Salt Lake, which is the area she lives. So yeah, just an all around really fun conversation. Lots of great content there. And lots of great concepts on this one as well. So I hope you guys really enjoy this one. I know I certainly did, and I'll let you get right to it. Hello, Marianne.
Hi, Ray. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good.
Good. How's your day going?
So far, so good. Took me about, I don't know, 15 minutes just to get a computer working, but
Oh, that's
hopefully it's
always
working
fun.
now.
Tech problems are the worst, aren't they?
Yeah.
I know. I can't stand them. I used to, you know what's weird? I used to actually be into that kind of stuff and like really fixing it when it was going wrong. And now that's like the last thing I want to deal with.
Yeah. It's not my favorite.
No. And it always seems to I mean, inevitably, right? Like most problems, right? They seem to happen right when you need things. The worst.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always fun stuff. It looks like you've been having a lot of fun with the macro stuff lately, huh?
I have been. So we've had a lot of wildfire smoke here and there. And
Yeah.
yeah, so when there's just a ton of particulates in the air, it's just not very fun with the zoom lens. I mean, with with the big telephoto lens,
Sure.
there's just so much
Yeah.
really hard to focus, and it just ends up looking like heat haze
Yep.
everywhere. So I have a macro lens, and so I dug it out, and I not only don't want to go outside when there's a lot of wildfire smoke,
Yeah.
um, you don't want to drive really far anywhere and like
Sure.
walk around and smoke and you can't breathe and everything else. So yeah, it's really nice just to pop outside for a few minutes, take a break from work or whatever. If
Yeah.
grab a few pictures in my yard.
That's really
Um,
cool. I got to think that the quality of light with those issues though is probably working really well for macro photography. Like
for
big giant
macro, it works
softbox.
really well. Yeah, because you don't have the distortion from all of that atmosphere.
Sure.
Um, but it does really cut down, the glare. And so it's a little bit like overcast, except it's more orange, orangey and
Yeah,
yellow. So this, you kind of get this golden hour look, even if it's not golden hour.
totally. Yeah. I mean, and I don't know. I don't do and have never done a lot of macro, at least wildlife macro, like insects and stuff like that. But every time I have, the best ones are always just like soft light, like, harsh or not harsh, but, direct sun can be rather challenging with that, I found.
Yeah, I haven't played much with macro, but I would assume it's like anything else, I guess. Direct light's going to be really hard. But I was enjoying for a while when we had the heavy smoke, that atmosphere for the bees in my yard was
Yeah. And is that
fun.
is that the first time you've really started kind of messing with it for, insects and stuff like that? Or is that something you've tried before in the past? Or did it only come about because of a need for something to shoot lately?
I had a macro lens when I had my jewelry business.
Okay.
Um, and so I had the macro lens, and I had gone outside trying to take pictures of bugs and things and was really, really disappointed in the results.
Yeah.
So I hadn't really tried it at all until just recently. And
Okay.
so, given the last couple years of, intent focus on photography, it made a world of difference. All of a sudden, I'm like, hey,
I
this,
know what I'm doing with this gear here. Yeah. Yeah.
this is kind of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, the results I'm seeing are beautiful. They really are. Is there anything that stands out that's vastly different from the longer lens stuff that you shoot? Because I know same things apply, they're obvious, right? Like lighting, composition still plays a role, obviously a very different composition. But, it seems like the same basic principles apply. But is there anything that stands out that's like, whoa, this is vastly different than shooting with a long lens kind of wildlife stuff?
I'm not sure if it's vastly different, but just the tiniest movement when you're that close to such a
Yeah.
tiny object, you're just a couple inches away. And so, just your body just balancing, standing there,
Yeah.
you're moving in and out and you can't keep focus or just the tiniest breeze, when you have a big long lens, you do have some of that, because such a long distance between you and the animal that little movements make a huge swing. It's not like that with macro. It's the it's the weaving in and out and inability to keep focus. But
Sure.
that's the main thing that I notice.
And are you using autofocus while you're doing that? Or are you going manual focus?
No, I'm basically having to do manual focus because I haven't been using a tripod.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, it's just, I like the bugs that are awake and
Yeah.
they're moving,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Tripod is kind of useless for that kind of stuff. And that and just changing composition alone, right? Like at the times I've
Yeah,
done it, it's like, oh, I want to swing into this background. And on a tripod, it would take so long that the thing's gone.
exactly. So yeah, so I was actually taking advantage of that. You get this razor thin focus, and I'm using an f2.8, and I'm out there in the morning, and there's smoke, and so it's like dark.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's just this super, super thin depth of field. And so that was what sort of inspired me to try a little bit of focus stacking, because
Ah,
I was like, wow, with this 2.8 and really low light, I can't really bump up the aperture, at all. So I want to try some focus stacking. And then I, YouTubed it and watched a few videos. It was like, oh, okay, so you got to basically use a tripod and use this setting on your camera.
uh-huh.
Um, and I tried it a little bit, and it was like, oh, well, this is essentially just taking my what I'm already using, which is my electronic shutter at 20 frames per second,
Yeah.
however fast it can go, given the other settings on your camera, and then clicking through the focus points, which is what I'm already doing as I'm sort of weaving back and forth. So I
Sure.
have all of these focus stacks already just from like,
Just from
my
hovering
body
around there.
as I'm trying to take the picture. So I just took like 6 or 8 pictures that I had been holding down, the shutter while I was weaving around trying to keep the focus, and stacked them, and it worked.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
I abandoned the tripod. I was like, well, I'm already taking these with my super, fast
Yeah.
frame rate.
Yep.
I'm already taking focus stacks. They're not that precise, but I am getting, like one shot with the antenna in focus and
Yep.
one with the mandible. And so, yeah, that was
No,
kind of fun.
that is cool. And then I also noticed like one of the things that really stood out to me just in looking at that, which, really is going to connect to, what you spend more time photographing, which is birds, is that it didn't take you long to throw one in there that is a little bit more scenic and kind of, for lack of a better term, right, small in frame macro with
Oh,
some beautiful backlight. You know what I mean?
oh yeah.
Yeah. So how did that? I mean, did you just see it and it's like, okay, it's time to back up and this fits, or was that a conscious like effort to try and make that happen, or how did that, shooting a little bit further away with macro come about?
Well, I mean, okay, so when you say a little bit further away, we're talking about like, 18 inches instead of 4.
Exactly. Yeah, but size of the subject in the
Yeah.
frame is
Yeah.
is
So
yeah.
what came about is I've just like planted myself in my garden in the middle of all of these weeds, and the sun has just sort of risen up over the mountains, and it's filtering through a bunch of
Yeah.
vegetation and a bunch of um, trees in my yard.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just kind of moving around till I get that really nice glow, and then looking for bugs, right? And
Okay.
sometimes they're close and sometimes they're far. And when they're far, that's one of my favorite things, is to get all of that
Yeah.
interesting foreground and shooting through. And um, I think shooting through a bunch of vegetation is one of the most fun things that you can do. And so it's like, all right, if a bee comes by in that perfect window of
Uh-huh.
light, I'm going to try and get it. And, so I like the way some of them came out. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, that really answers the question, right? It was a very purposeful thing. It was finding that right scene, seeing that light, knowing that it's going to look good if something gets there, and then waiting for that thing to happen, versus just like looking around. Oh, there it is. I point it. Oh, hey, this happens to work, kind of thing.
Right. No, I was picking the light, and then I knew that, the bees they were all over the place, but I was
Sure.
waiting for them to enter into that particular window where I
Yep.
really wanted to take a picture, and then kind of, just scooching myself a little this way and that to get
Yeah. Yeah.
it clear so that it wasn't completely buried in all the foreground. That's
No, no, that's awesome. Yeah, it is. The few times I've done it, it is really fun, and it's so one of the things that always stood out to me with that kind of photography, especially compared to bird photography or any other wildlife photography, is it's like you can basically just go sit down anywhere. I mean, almost anywhere outside, and if you sit there for 5 minutes and really start looking, I mean, really looking, you will find a subject. There is an insect there.
It's true. There's almost always something there.
Yeah.
Uh, the challenges are similar with birds, though, is that they are moving and they see you
Yes.
and they want to get away when you come really close. And so, yeah, a lot of that has helped me, I think, with the birds, just understanding that like this creature's aware of my presence, and how to
Yep.
approach it, what angle to sit, and where to put the light, and all of that. It's a lot of lessons that I've been able to take from bird photography to start having fun with macro.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And do you notice, connecting that to the bird photography now, um, how much have you noticed that your ability to kind of get closer or even just get in the right position? Because it's not always about getting closer. It's more about, I found, just getting in the right position to get the photo you want with your subject, with a bird. Um, how much of that ability to kind of gauge their behavior, their acceptance level, or even anticipate some of that behavior because you've seen enough. How important is that to how you shoot now compared to how it was in the beginning when you kind of didn't know that behavior and you were just constantly surprised that birds were, always leaving kind of thing?
Well, I would say, Ray, I'm still very much a beginner in that regard. I have learned a lot about bird behavior and how to approach them and, how not to. But I feel like, fieldcraft is really the thing that I have the most to learn on. And so, yeah, I have learned a lot. I definitely take my time and a lot more care with the approach.
Yeah.
But I'm also positioning myself much more thoughtfully just with
Yes.
regard to the light and the shot that I want, and then hoping that I don't, scare everything away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's always going to happen, right? It doesn't matter how careful we are, that's still going to happen at times. But, I can certainly notice that my odds have increased over the years compared to when I was a beginner. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking, how does anybody get the photos of these birds? And then you kind of figure them out and you're like, oh, this is how.
Yeah. I mean, certain things I realize like, oh, I flushed, these birds, but I bet they're going to come back if I just sit here,
Mm,
really quietly. So I sort of started to have a sense about when to sit and wait and when to just leave, and
yeah,
also just how not to flush them, because obviously that's always the goal,
sure.
just to not disturb them. But how to sort of uh how to just sort of sit and be patient and wait for them to come back, or to come to me, or to
Yep.
anticipate they're going to go and be there when they get there, those sorts of things. I'm starting to get little glimmers of, you know how to do that. But I would say that's a major thing that um I just need to learn. And I think it just takes time in the field, right?
Totally. Yeah, definitely. I mean, all this stuff takes time, but then there are certain elements of it that I do think just require even more time to get. And that behavior one is one that's like, yeah, sure, I can, maybe I've really figured out X species and I kind of really have them understood at this particular location, but then I can go find them in another spot and then all of a sudden they're behaving differently. Or there's the element of, all right, now I'm going to go work with this species that's different. And now all those things that I've just figured out about the previous one have just gone out the window because this particular bird just acts completely different and requires an entirely different approach. And so I think that fieldcraft element of it, while there are, bits and pieces that cross over across every species, every other species does, they're individual and they're unique, and even individuals are unique. And so it's never going to end, right? There's just always going to be something to learn in that aspect of things with that fieldcraft and how to make the approach work to get the photo you want.
Well, and the other thing is, I agree with all of that you just said, but time of the year, right? They behave completely differently depending
Yeah.
on where they're at in their life cycle. Are they nesting? Are they, migrating?
Yep.
What's going on? What you learned in August just may not apply in
Yeah,
January.
totally.
The
I
same
know.
birds, in the area. I learned that with the scrub jays that I lure into my yard with peanuts.
Yeah.
They don't care about peanuts in the summer, it turns out. They don't like them, spring and summer, they're like, "Meh."
They can't
Mm,
shove them down their babies' throats. Yeah. It's not going to
yeah,
work.
they don't want 'em.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you have to have a completely different approach, depending on the time of year, that you're trying to, uh, trying to take pictures of birds.
Yeah, and it inevitably feels like, especially if you're spending a decent chunk of time with a particular, species, it's like, okay, I finally figured out, and that's about when things start changing again,
Right.
and you're like, okay, I guess I'll apply this next year. That's usually how it goes
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, yeah, I'm trying to remember what I learned last year, but, um, yeah, it's a long time away, last year.
It is. It is, yeah. But it's so funny. I mean, the longer I do this, and the longer I do this and shoot in my same local areas, the more habitual I become. It's like, okay, it's this month, this is what I go photograph. It's this month, this is what I go photograph. It's this month, this is what I go photograph. And it just kind of goes that way throughout the year. And obviously, to keep from getting too bored, I'm trying to mix that up both with local species and with travel. But there's a comfort and an advantage that comes with using that gained knowledge year after year on and applying it to that species in a particular year. Plus just the simple fact of the more time you're out there and the more time you spend with them, the odds are in your favor to get more, really interesting moments. And it's just fun how that kind of works out and allows me to kind of learn from that past experience, and it just gets better and better every year, you know?
That's good. It's good to know. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, how long have you been shooting?
About a year and a half.
Okay. All right. I don't know why I thought it
Uh,
was longer. Yeah.
well,
With the
okay, so
wildlife, but I know you've been doing photography
wildlife,
longer. Yeah.
yeah. As a serious photographer, about yeah, I started. I'm a pandemic photographer. I
Okay.
started in March of 2020.
Okay.
Um, I had, as I mentioned, a jewelry business
Hmm.
about 8 or 10 years ago, and so I was selling online, and so I needed to take pictures of the jewelry in order to sell them online. And I had pulled out, whatever point and shoot that we had, and took a lot of really bad photos, and got extremely frustrated, and I kind of hated it. I kind of hated it for actually quite a while,
Okay.
and then at some point, I think I got like one good photo, and I sold like 40 pairs of those earrings, right? Like, it was the photo. It wasn't the earrings. I
Wow.
had the earrings listed before, right? But
Yeah.
I had a beautiful photo that had just like a little bit of magic, And I realized, like, wow, it's really, if you can make the magic of whatever it is that you're looking at come through in the image,
Mm.
that's really powerful. And so I still wasn't any good, but a friend of mine gifted me a used DSLR, and I bought the macro lens that I still have
Okay.
for jewelry photography, and I figured out like a setting that worked, and I took all my
And there you
photos
go.
on.
Yeah.
And I sort of always had it in the back of my mind that one day I would really focus on photography. And I didn't really know if it would be landscape or what genre, but just before the pandemic started, I was planning a trip to Belize. And I thought, gosh, it would be really fun to take a camera and, get pictures of all the wildlife that we're going to see. And so I started thinking about it, and,
Yeah.
I Googled like what lens to take to Belize.
And then
And I was like,
instantly
oh, you
found
need
out
it.
like, whoa, that's expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, oh crap. Well, I guess I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
But then, Belize was canceled. Everything was canceled. And I was like, well,
Ah,
consolation prize, I think I'll get a telephoto lens. And so it was probably the best purchase, that I've made in years, because I spent, the entire spring and summer of that COVID pandemic year outside with my camera, taking pictures of wildlife. And so that sort of sparked it.
that's
And,
so
I
cool.
figured out like about settings, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And what was that lens? What was that first telephoto lens?
I bought a 70 to 200 f2.8,
Okay.
um, and I still have it, and it's a nice lens. But then within like 2 months, I was like, yeah, well, that's not enough.
Yeah. You figured that out quickly, huh? Did you have
Yeah,
were you
so
using like a teleconverter or just as it
no,
was?
just 70 to 200. And, I was just at the park and like in my
Yep.
front yard with birds at the feeder, right? So I wasn't doing anything spectacular, but it was also really obvious that like I wasn't gonna
Yeah.
um, do what I wanted to do. And so then I think it was like 3 months later, I bought um, the 1 to 400.
Yep.
And then I used that for probably another, I don't know, 2 or 3 months. And then I got a 500 f4. And then I was satisfied.
Yes, yeah, it really is. That becomes a game changer. It's so funny. I very similarly followed that same progression. My first wildlife, birding photos were 70 to 200, and then I got a 300 f4 with a teleconverter, so I was shooting like 420, and then the 500 after that. But yeah, it was. I'm glad that I didn't just start off with the big prime, because I think I learned so much about that element that we were talking about earlier, that field craft of getting close, because you really had to figure that out when you're using these shorter focal lengths. Did you experience that same thing?
you know, I I did a little bit, but I don't think I was having any success with,
Mm,
smaller frame or like figuring things out with my 70 to 200. I was still just really trying to get close.
gotcha.
Um, and, so I would be able to get close to the feeder birds in my yard, close
Sure.
enough, right? And I got some nice, you know, documentary shots there. But I'm really glad, like you said, that I didn't start with a 500 because yeah, it would have been incredibly discouraging, like I
Yeah,
needed to I needed to work into it gradually
I agree.
because it's heavy, it's like super hard to hold. Like I just didn't even know how to pick it up. Like
Yep,
how do you handle it? I didn't know how to put it on a tripod. Ray, you had to tell me to, switch out the foot. Like
yep,
I just didn't know anything. And if I had started out with that, um, I would have given up very, very quickly. So it was a good thing I had a little bit of a progression, with lighter, smaller lenses that I could handle a lot better. And even as it is, sometimes I'm just like, this thing it's hard. It's
yeah,
just really hard to handle this thing all the time.
do
And then
you
I put like now I have a converter on it too, like a 1.4x
yeah.
converter, and you just out there, it's a beast.
It is. Do you
And
ever
not only
pick up
that,
the 1 to 400 now? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say, and not only that, people just can't not say something about it, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, how many comments about the moon do you get when
Oh
it's
yeah,
just
how's Jupiter looking this
uh-huh.
morning?
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Which listen, understandably from the outside, right? Cuz it just seems absurd. It really does if you're not
Oh,
into this.
absolutely. Well, and that I'm like such a beginner with this absurdly giant lens also, makes me feel a little self-conscious walking around. People are like, wow, you must be a professional.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like,
Which is such a weird term too. The whole, oh, you must be a
yeah,
professional photographer. I know people that don't make a dime on it that are like some of the best photographers out there. So
right.
it is funny how we just associate this concept of, oh, you get paid for a job, so you must be the best. And it's, with a passion and a hobby like this, it's not always certainly the case.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I just think people, especially here, there are photographers, but I think there's not a high density of photographers, and so yeah, people just they've just never seen anything like it. So they have to comment,
Yeah. Where
which
is
is
here,
it's
by the way?
fine. What's that?
I said, where is here, by the way?
Oh, I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So continue. I'm sorry I cut you off there. What were you going to say?
Uh, I don't remember.
Okay.
What was it?
Do you ever go back to the 1 to 400? Do you still have that lens?
I have taken it out, especially if I'm hiking or something like that, and I'm always disappointed.
Are you? That's what I was
Yeah.
going to, I was curious what your experience was with that.
I'll go out and I'll be like frustrated with the 500, or especially if I have the teleconverter on,
Hmm.
and I'll be like, oh man, I really wish I could pull back a little bit right now. And so then next day I'll take out the 1 to 400 and I'll be like, oh man, I really need that reach.
That's so funny.
So I end up 90% of the time with just walking around with that 500
Yeah.
prime.
Yeah. I just was wondering. So for me, I've had my 500 for probably pushing on 10 years at this point. And so now every time I shoot a lighter setup, I'm like, oh, this is nice. And
Yeah.
I certainly recognize like when I need the big lens, when I need the good lens. It's like, okay, I really want to I want this outing to be the best it can be. I'm picking up that 500 prime every time. But, you know, I'm somewhat not necessarily forced, but I can teach a lot better when I'm not carrying around a big heavy lens. So whenever I'm working, more often than not, and not always, but more often than not, I'll opt to bring my really lightweight 300 f4 with a teleconverter in it. So I'm shooting 420 millimeter prime, 5.6 aperture maximum, but I can shoot the thing and hold it in one hand. It's so light. And so whenever I have that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like the flexibility that you get just for composing and paying attention to background and foreground and all that is just, I mean, there's times that I am convinced that I've gotten a better shot with that because of the flexibility of being able to move where I wanted to in a quick moment that I wouldn't have been able to do with the big lens.
Yeah.
So I think there's an application for it, but just like you said, 90% of the time, if I really want it to be the best it's going to be, I'm going to pick up that 500 f4.
And I think more than the reach, it's the f4.
Yeah,
That's what I really like about the lens, right?
yeah,
I just really love that super mushy,
yep.
I just love the wide open aperture.
It's
And
addicting.
and I thought I could carry it around, I'd get a 2.8 just because I love that
Oh
so
yeah,
much. And then you can always put a teleconverter on it, right?
yep.
And um But yeah, I think that's what I miss more than anything. I notice the difference just in the feel of the photos more than anything, and so that's why I always end up going back to the
Yeah.
bigger lens.
Yeah.
So I'm
No.
really hoping that Canon comes out with a, um, for their new RF
Yep.
mount, like I would like a 2 to 500 f4. Thank you,
Yes.
Canon.
My ex, so we were both wedding photographers. We ran a photography business together for 10 years. And she would always, as a joke, she'd be like, all right, I want a 24 to 200 millimeter f2 straight through. Like, make it happen. And it's like, I mean, the absurdity, like the size and the physical weight of a lens like that would be the most ridiculous thing ever, let alone just the fact that they probably can't even optically make something like that. But it's like, I mean, if something like that existed, like amazing, right?
Right.
Yeah, we can only
Actually,
wish.
Canon's got some really low aperture new lenses for their RF mount.
Yes,
They look really interesting. I mean,
I
they're
know.
they're wide angle, so I
Yeah,
haven't bought any, but I'm hoping that they continue with that theme up into the telephoto lenses.
yeah, no, definitely, no doubt. Um, so I want to talk about something you mentioned a little bit earlier. You mentioned the thoughtful approach that you have, and that's one thing that has stood out to me with your photography from the beginning. And I have multiple questions here about this. Number one, do you think, like, how much do you think your photography now, where it's at, is a learned part versus you just inherently have an eye for it? Because I'm here to tell you, whether you say it or not, you have an eye for this, and some people do, and some people just don't naturally have it. And when I say that, I don't mean that they can't learn it, because I consider myself that. I consider myself someone who through brute force and just trial and error for years and years kind of learned it to get to where I'm at, whereas others kind of pick it up in such a short period of time. I think there's a natural inclination there. So do you recognize that natural inclination in yourself? Because I certainly see it from the outside.
Well, thank you. I don't know. I think that everybody comes at it with their own natural inclination. Like you probably come at it from the technical side, and that's where
Totally.
a lot of creativity springs from, right? Like I see you out there with your, million different recording devices and your flash setups, and
Yep.
you're using your technical expertise to create these incredibly creative and beautiful and original images. And so, um, yeah, I think I do have an eye for I think I have an eye for what, is visually impactful, and so I
Agreed.
can see that a little bit. Maybe that's where, my sort of, strength comes from. It's not from the technical side. I mean, I can do technical stuff, but it's not my first love, right?
Sure.
Not where I come from, and I think other people, they come at it from, um you're either the treasure hunter, right? Like a birder who's like,
Sure.
species awareness. I mean, and they're going to have a tremendous amount of creativity because of their field craft, because they know the birds,
Exactly.
because they know the
Yeah.
calls, because they recognize, I mean, they're going to come at it with their own special talent. And so, yeah, I would say that probably the place I come from is I like to see the magic, um, in the imagery. And so that's probably my strength. The field craft, I got I got a long way to go. Right? The technical side to me, it's like, it's the price of admission, right? You
Sure.
got to pay if you want to get in. But it's not something that I love and that I do for fun on the side. And yeah. So I think everybody comes at it with their own special sort of eye,
That's a
and
wonderful
that's
take.
up from it.
Yeah, no, that is a wonderful take. And in regards to that technical side, for me, I think you nailed it. That definitely is a big part of it. And what I find amusing to myself now is, in hindsight, where I currently see it now compared to where I was with it, let's say, especially in the beginning, or in the middle of my path in this photography, is I used to put such an emphasis on it and think there was so much importance on it. And now I recognize that while I want to know the technical side of things so that I can get what I want out of it, I find that to be the least important part of the final product. If that makes sense, like I think like me as a viewer of photography, like if I view any one of your photos, some of my favorite photos of yours, I don't really care how it was shot. I just care that it looks beautiful in the end. I don't care what was used. I don't care what lens it was shot, what shutter speed, aperture, ISO. Like none of that really matters as a viewer. What matters is what that photo looks like in the end. And so to me, now I can recognize like, yes, we need to know those technical things so we can achieve that. But in the end, it doesn't matter. So like finding that balance of understanding and knowing that technical stuff versus kind of almost ignoring it, if that makes any sense. I don't know. Do you find yourself trying to figure out a balance between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I consider the technical side for me, it's something that you kind of have to do. It's
Yeah.
not the fun part for me, but and I see what you're saying, right? Like you only need to get, again, price of admission, right? Like you
Yeah.
only need to have a certain amount um of technical perfection in a photograph, but the other stuff is what really makes it magical, right?
Yeah.
But again, the technical part can destroy what might have been a magical photograph too. So you can't do without it. And then I do think, again, as I said, I do think the technical side can be an avenue to creativity. I mean, people who are really um, into the post processing part of it can
Sure.
be incredibly creative, right? So yeah, I think
Yeah, I agree. And there's an element of also just being aware that if you pay attention to the technical side of things too much, I think that can be a path to almost stifling creativity because you're
sure.
you're caring about that so much that you're not letting yourself see what's in front of you or see what could be in front of you.
Right. For me, there's got to be something about the image that makes me say, wow. And it's usually not like it is so sharp, right?
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
I mean, that is always like really impressive, especially with a close up and it's just like razor
Sure.
sharp. Man, that's super tight.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
looks good. But without the other sort of, I don't know what you call it, but without the other magical part, you don't even notice, right? Like it, it's got to
Sharp
have something else.
Sharpness doesn't elicit an emotion to me other
No.
than an appreciation. I can appreciate it, but it doesn't connect me to the photo in the way that some incredible light or scene or just the mood, right? Like sharpness doesn't set a mood to a photo. And I love seeing a photo like that. That's what catches my eye. Is, wow, look at the mood of this photo or that moment or the color or look at that wildly different composition that includes a ton of space, which we will get to because that you're incredible with that. But all of those ingredients are the things that, for me personally, and I fully accept that everybody has a different list of things right there that stop them and wow them. But I would be hard pressed to find a lot of people that would say, the most important thing that wows me on a photo is sharpness every time. I might be wrong, but I'd be surprised.
No, I think that's only when you're looking at your own photos.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, guess what,
Yeah.
right? How are we viewing most of these photos? We're viewing them on the tiniest screen possible, so you can't even appreciate that detail half the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, sharpness and the other one that I tend to ignore a lot is noise. I mean, there could come a point with
I'm
which
with
the
you.
noise is obnoxious.
Yep.
But I just got a new computer and I couldn't get like Topaz denoise installed and as a plugin in Photoshop, and so for like a month I just couldn't be bothered. Like, well, there's noise and it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yep.
It just doesn't bother me that much.
Yeah. I'm very. One of the descriptions I tell a lot of my students when I start working with them, they start asking me those questions. What do you do for noise reduction? I'm like, all right, let me just put this out there. I'm very noise tolerant. That's like a
Well,
description I use of myself. At least because I feel like it's like, I'm not trying to eliminate all noise in an image.
Well, I have to say, part of my noise tolerance is because I specifically bought a camera that is really good in very low light. And
Correct.
coming from a camera where noise was just, it was terrible, right? I had the 1 to
Yeah.
400 lens, which is a 5.6, f5.6, something like that. And then it was a crop sensor and an older camera, and I couldn't take any photo in golden hour light that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
just noisy, just like terribly noisy to the point at which it didn't have any life.
Yep.
There was no, I guess it's the dynamic range,
The
right?
color suffers as well. Yeah.
color is off, the detail is bad. Like it just killed any photograph in beautiful light. And I
Yeah.
still look back at those photos. I was like, yeah, that was perfect time to be out shooting. And that photo is totally flat,
Yep.
right? So, I have the Canon R6, which is a mirrorless. I think that was that was about a year ago.
Yeah.
When I became really frustrated, realizing that like, hey, you know what? This camera is holding me back.
Yep.
And since then, I just noise. It's like, yeah, that's nothing.
Yep. I know.
But it is the lens and it's the camera that makes it to where, I can get the shots that I want and the noise is acceptable. So I fully accept that there is a level of noise that is unacceptable.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's funny. I remember having that conversation with you when you were thinking about getting a new camera, and then, and I always try not to push people, right? Because I don't want to push somebody in a direction simply because of my own biases for my own photography. So that's the thing I'm always consciously aware of, is trying to say, this is what I think for how I shoot, but that may not be necessarily what's right for whoever I'm talking to. But I do remember...
Everybody wants to shoot like you, so you should just tell them.
Well, what I remember is you were debating between the high resolution R5 and the lower resolution R6, and I kind of remember just trying to weigh the pros and cons and trying to be as unbiased as possible, but thinking in my head like, just go for the R6. Trust me, you'll love it. You'll love it. You'll love it. Like, because I think there's this overall concept that I see from the community at large with wildlife photography of resolution, and that trade-off, it comes out in one of the things that stands out so much about your photography, and I hear the most from viewers that are impressed with your photography, and it's that the colors that you get, and you shoot in these dusk and pre-dawn and after sunset moments so much. And listen, again, and we're going to talk more about it, not to take away your creativity or anything, but you're able to do that both in part because of the lens, but that camera can handle it. And that's, that's an important part of it there. And I think a lot of people may overlook the ability to shoot in low light.
Yeah. The subtlety of, the subtleties of that sort of magic, blue hour light are just completely killed with, too much noise, right? Or just, the camera makes it possible. Absolutely. I agree. And when people say things like, oh, it's not the camera, it's the photographer, I'm like, well, okay, sure. Also,
it's both.
It's both.
It's the combination every single time.
It's precisely 50-50.
No, I would not say that at all. I would give different percentages towards the photographer, but you have to, there's images I can't take with a lesser camera sometimes, no doubt.
Yeah. But at its core, you need a camera.
Yeah.
And you need a person.
Yeah.
And, in any given photograph, the role of the camera versus the person is going to, vary. But just, overall, it's a gear-based sport, right? Like the gear really matters. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like saying, you don't need great light to get good photographs. It's like, well, no, you don't, but it sure does help.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can struggle and fight through it and maybe find something. And, there's a time when that is the right action, right? If you're on a vacation somewhere, you've gone on a trip and you're trying to take advantage of every moment you have and the light sucks, push through by all means, But if you're local and you can control when you go out, stop going out in crappy light. It'll just put the odds in your favor.
Yeah, and a great photographer can take great pictures in any conditions, and I also think a great photographer can take great pictures on any camera. But as a beginner, which I am, I still consider myself a beginner. Putting yourself in the best light and having really good gear is going to really accelerate, I think, what you're able to do.
Accelerates, and it's an odd increaser all the time. Every one of those little pieces of things just put the odds more in your favor. And in a photography genre where the odds are low anyway because our subjects are trying to flee us constantly, like every little piece of gear that you can get better odds for is a bonus.
Absolutely. And you just be having more fun because you'll be sucking less,
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. back to that thoughtful approach, though. That is the one thing. But there's many things. I shouldn't say that's the one thing. But I can say it's the one thing that stands out the most to me is that there is a ton of thought behind your photos. You're not just wandering out and seeing what's going to happen and then just pointing the camera at it. There's so much thought in your composition. I love the wild compositions that you come up with. It's very rare. I just see a smack centered composition from you. You have no problem putting tons of foreground in, you shoot on the water quite often. You have no problem putting subjects super high in the frame, which is not something that's seen a ton of. What made you kind of want to shoot that way? What made you go in that direction versus, just sticking with a little bit more of the standard compositions? Like what appealed to you that made you go that direction?
Well, I think that one of the things that I really enjoy in photography, like when I'm looking at people's photography and I say, wow, is something that is surprising. I want
Yeah.
it to be a little bit surprising, right? And so one way to do that is with an oddball composition. And so, I say, you said brute force a while ago, and that's me. I mean, I just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm trying everything. And then I'm scanning through and which one catches my eye, right? I got the bird here and there and everywhere.
Yeah.
I've got it with foreground and without. I've got it, backlit and frontlit if I can actually keep it in, the same place for that long.
Sure.
But I'm trying everything because I don't know, right? I don't know from the get-go what's going to work. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm just trying a lot of different things. And so that's part of it. And then the other thing is as I'm learning, I think that every, technique that you have in the bag is a tool.
Yeah.
And the more tools you have, the better chances you are to be able to make something of a moment when it arrives. And so I'm also trying like very conscientiously, like, okay, try this with foreground because that's hard. And if you figure it out, maybe this shot with the song sparrow isn't going to be, or, whatever it is,
Sure.
isn't going to be that awesome. But when you do come upon a really good situation, it'll be second nature and you'll be able to whip it out of the bag and like,
Yeah.
make it happen. So a lot of it is just, I'm just experimenting constantly. Like you said, it's very thoughtful as if I were planning a lot of it, but I am planning to try these things, right? And I'm
Yes.
planning
That's
to
what I
go to
mean.
this. Yeah. But most of the photos that I think are the best are the ones where I have seen the moment and I didn't plan for it, but I was able to capture it in a way that made the most of the moment
Yes.
because I have been sort of working hard on, trying all of these things. So yeah, I would say most of my shots are very unplanned, but also I think I've been fairly methodical about trying to, add those techniques to my toolkit so that when I come upon them, I can make the most of it.
Yeah, and when I say thoughtful too, I think to be more clear about it, it's thoughtful in the moment. So you're not just pointing your camera at the scene. You're you're thoughtful when that happens. So, and it's quick. So I think to a lot of people it doesn't even feel that thoughtful because it happens so fast. I became a lot more aware of it myself when I started teaching because all of a sudden I'm having to put into words what's actually going on in my head. And turns out a scene, a bird lands in a spot. I make anywhere from 10 to sometimes 30 decisions based on everything I'm seeing in like 3 seconds, and it's, from the outside, it wouldn't appear thoughtful. And even from me, it didn't appear that thoughtful because it happened in such a short period of time. But the reality is there was a lot of thoughts and decisions that went into play there. And, I certainly see that in your photography. You're not just, these birds aren't, you don't have a line of ducks floating in on the Great Salt Lake with this beautiful sky behind it and the horizon fading in just the right spot. And you're just standing there or laying there and just smack center them and then take the shot. Like that's not what's happening. You're paying attention to where they are in relation to the background. You're getting, hills that come down and point to them in just the right spot. You're waiting for them to line up the right way. Like there's all these decisions that are coming into play that make those images, from my perspective as a viewer, appear very thoughtful, even though it may happen super fast. Do you notice that yourself?
Yeah, and one of the ways that I work on that is I keep all of these really bad photos, and I go through them. I look at them, a lot. I'll look at them when I download them initially, and then I'll
Sure.
keep them for a while, and I'll look at them a month later, and I will look at them and try to figure out why they don't work, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
why, this should have been really good. Like what is it about it? And then I'll say something like, well, it would have been really cool, if this line had
Yeah.
come here, or it would have been really neat if, this and that. And so then the next time I'm out in a similar situation, I've kind of rehearsed that,
Yeah.
um, that situation. And so yeah, I'm always trying to bring into real time what I've been thinking about, pondering as I'm editing and failing to discard all of my photos.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that for a lot of photographers probably, there's the conscious parts that we're really paying attention to, but I'll bet there's so many subtleties that are just kind of subconscious, that are just almost a gut feeling that you've learned over time of, I do this and I like the result of it. And even if it's not a for, forefront of your mind conscious decision at the time of taking the photo, it's maybe just something that you walk this direction, and maybe you just did that because inherently something in the foreground or background is going to maybe line up, even if it wasn't a glaring, in your face kind of decision. I'll bet you there's a lot of that goes on, and with more experience, the more of that just becomes natural, and also then frees your mind up to pay attention to other things in the photo, and just keep improving and improving and making those decisions to clean up a photo and make it more thoughtful.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so you're not the only mentor that I have, Ray. I've been
Awesome.
yeah.
I think
um,
that's the way to do it. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Although you're my favorite one. I
Oh,
really,
thank you.
yeah, I really appreciate everything that I learned from you. But I subscribe to, it's called the Journal of Wildlife Photography. It's Jared Lloyd, and he said
Yes.
something really, I thought, perceptive. So he was talking about, oh, what are the thought processes that go through your mind as you're setting up a shot? How do you not blow it? And he's saying, first of all, you look at the background. Second of all, you look at like the foreground, and then you look at the composition. And somewhere way down the line is like the subject. But one thing that he said that he likes to do is ask himself, what is the adjective that describes this scene that you like about it, and how can you enhance that? So,
Mm,
if it's like sparkly, like how can you make it more sparkly? Or if
yeah.
it's calm, how can you make it more calm? How can you enhance, dark or dramatic or bright or
Yep.
happy? And so that's something that I've been trying to actually employ when I go out there and say, what is it about this scene that I love? And how do I maximize that? How do I optimize that for the photo? So I've been trying to do that, and I think that's actually a really helpful way to think about it. Like
I
what
very much
describes?
agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That is a wonderful concept. And so, yeah, thanks for passing that along. Um, yeah, certainly not something I've ever consciously thought of myself, but as soon as you say it, it makes absolutely perfect sense. And in hindsight, I can kind of say, oh, I think I'm probably doing that, because that's, for my photography, I can certainly say that's one of the things I like about my photography is I would say I try extremes of everything, right? That's that's usually
right,
that's where I find myself in my happy places. If the light's dramatic, oh, I'm leaning into that. I'm going to make it as dramatic as possible. If it's light and airy, I'm going to push in that direction as much as possible. So, while it maybe isn't a conscious decision on my part, I'll bet you it's conceptually kind of the same thing happening over and over again, because I think the images that stand out to us all as for ourselves and for a viewer are the things that are on the extremes. Those are
right.
the images that stand out to me, not the this kind of middle of the road average. And again, I hate saying the word average, because I feel like it has such a negative connotation to it, because an average photo can still be a really pretty, beautiful photo that I can appreciate. But the ones that are gonna really draw my attention over top of the massive amount of images I see every day are the ones on the extremes.
Yeah, and I mean that touches on like what is actual creativity, right? Because when you look at something and it's so unusual that it just catches your eye, it's so surprising, right? Um, it's not surprising for all that long because people catch on,
Yeah.
especially in the age of the internet, right? And so, you know, maybe there was a time when backlit was like all, radical, but now it's like everybody's doing really nice backlit work, and you
Yep.
gotta kind of, it's like fashion, right? It's like
Yeah.
one day I saw on Instagram, right, somebody using a, out of focus bird as, as a backdrop for an in
Yep.
focus bird. It's like, oh, I have a picture like that, and I posted mine, and then it's like they're everywhere, right? All of a
Yeah.
sudden, you've got like out of focus bird, and you're just like, whoa, okay, that's actually not on the leading edge anymore. Like,
Yep.
that, now I got to be like, to surprise people. You gotta come up with something new, and that's kind of just the nature of creativity in general, art, fashion. It moves really fast, and I
Yep.
think in the age of the internet, it's moving incredibly fast. And as you said, an average photo, what is average is, I think the bar is just going up exponentially, right?
Oh,
And
no
I am
doubt.
a beneficiary of this era of, mirrorless cameras and giant lenses and digital. I'm the beneficiary of all this amazing technology that makes sort of a ho hum photo pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it's interesting to see, even just in the year that I've been paying attention, it's really interesting to see how that migrates.
Yeah,
Um,
no doubt. I
and
very
very
much
quickly.
agree. With your desire to surprise in a photo that you mentioned earlier, how important is that concept of being on the leading edge of stuff? How important is that to you? Is it something you seek out, really concern yourself with, or is it just, try to keep just doing your thing, and if it surprises, great, and if not, that's okay.
I think for me, there's not like a path to that. It just happens or it doesn't, right? You're
Okay.
out there and you see this opportunity and you're like, dang, that's good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or that's like, actually, that's a fine photo, but it's just not doing anything for me, right?
Yep.
So I don't know what it is that makes that happen. I'm not consciously, sitting around thinking like, what's the next big thing? What's unique, what's different. I'm just trying to get the best picture I can get, and then hope that I come upon something interesting at some point, right?
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, because it's funny you mention it, because I fully recognize in myself that as soon as a concept or technique catches on and becomes, quote unquote, a little bit more mainstream, right? You start seeing it everywhere. I've
Yes.
immediately lost interest in doing it myself. And so
Right.
that immediately causes me to want to be like, what else can I do? And it's funny you point out, we talked about how I feel like, and you notice that I'm a little bit more technically inclined. So that's what I turn to, right? So I start turning towards my technical inclination to how can I use these things to take that next leap, so let me start buying weird lenses, let me throw my telephoto lens in an underwater housing, let me start shooting things out of focus on purpose. It's just like, what can I do to stay ahead of the curve and make a surprising image that stands out from the crowd? And so often I find myself lately going to you know technical things that can help me achieve that goal. And then
Right. Special
also,
skill.
yeah,
Yes.
also realizing as I do them, like, oh, this makes things so much harder. At the same time, it's like I get the underwater housing. I'm like, oh, this will be like amazing. I'm just going to be able to shoot in the water, and I'm going to be the first one doing it. I've never seen anybody, I'm sure it's been done, but I personally have never seen anybody shooting, 400 millimeter in an underwater housing. And guess what? Turns out there's a reason why. It sucks. It's the most difficult thing I've done. Do you know like how many amazing photos I've passed up because I've got that set up in that housing? But every once in a while, something comes out of that that's like, holy shit, that's not possible to do any other way. And that's, to me, I'm like, yep, that's where I'm at right there. Put me in that super low percentage, really difficult area of zone right there, and let me pull out one really cool photo every once in a while. That's all me right there.
Yeah. No, that's great. It's really good. I mean, it's good that you also know that that's sort of you can have a creative wellspring from the technical side. For
Yeah.
me, I don't really, not able to sort of put my finger on what it is that makes me necessarily creative. Uh, Sometimes it just pops out.
I mean, if you're happy to allow me to answer, I can certainly throw some descriptions your way. To me, it's composition, light, and color. Like those three things are what stand out to me in the best of your photos. A sense of space. That like you are incredible at incorporating a sense of space in your photos. And you know that location that you shoot, the Great Salt Lake, has a sense of space. And if we jump back to that thing you mentioned, Jared Lloyd said, you know, if that's the adjective that stands out, I mean, damn, you are nailing it, you know, because that really comes across in your photos of anything from that area. And it's an incredibly unique thing. You capture it so well. And, you know, it just, from everybody that follows you and knows of your photography that I talk to, and there's more and more every day. You know, I was just before this, I was recording, doing the live show with my friends, and two of your photos came up in that show in the conversation, and it was just, you know, everybody just saying the same thing, like, oh my gosh, look at, you know, the photos are just incredible and mind blowing, and I think those are the things that stand out to me. That's that sense of space, the color, the composition, and the light.
Well, thank you, Ray. I actually popped into your live conversations sort of right at the tail end. I saw one of my pictures up and you guys were just wrapping up. I was like, oh, look at my picture.
Yeah.
Yay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I mean, that means a lot to me. I'm so glad that people see it and see what I see. Because sometimes I don't know, you know, will people see how cool this is? Will they actually, you know, get that feeling that I get, which is just like, whoa, this is amazing. I can't even believe I'm here right now, right? Like this is just like stunning.
Yeah.
And I just hope that some of that comes through. And it's very, I'm very glad to hear that people get some sense of that because that's what I'm trying to do, right? Trying to share that, especially with that location. So if I might divert the conversation a little bit, I've been
Please.
working on a project at the
I had
Great
that on my
Salt.
list to talk about, so
Oh,
good.
okay. Um, so I've been going, as you said, I've been spending a lot of time at the Great Salt Lake. And just to touch on one thing, I mean, it is vast, right? And so that is one of the main concepts that I like to try to get across. It's just the scale of the place because it's huge. It's like being on another planet. I mean, it's a place of extremes, right?
Yeah.
And um, extreme extreme environment, extreme beauty. I mean, it's really, really quite stunning. Um, and so I just can't get enough of it. But also, it's incredibly important habitat for birds.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's a I don't know if you go on like the Audubon website description of the Great Salt Lake. You know, they've got it all. You know, 5 important globally important bird areas, this and that. You know, something like 7 million birds come through annually. I mean, it's a
Wow.
lot of birds. You know, over 200 species come through there. Many of them are migrating on their way to nesting grounds or down south. And so it's like a great big funnel where all these birds from all over the hemisphere, you know, land in this, you know, this relatively small spot, you know, in
Yeah.
the middle of the desert. It's so incredibly important for their survival. So not only is it just incredibly beautiful and it's incredibly important for birds, but it's also really endangered
Mm.
at the moment, and it's drying up, and it's you know human caused. You know we've had a decade of drought, and there's increasing pressure both residentially and commercially, but largely agriculturally for the water. And you know Utah, like much of the West, is really struggling with water policy right now because the old ways don't work in
Sure.
an environment, you know, in a climate where there isn't as much water as, you know, all of the previous models were built on, right?
And more in demand
And,
for it.
and more demand, right? There's more demand, and there's not as much water coming out of the sky, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, traditionally, you know, when you're talking about water rights, the actual lakes and the rivers and the birds and nature don't have rights. Water is allocated to people, and it'll be allocated, you know, 100% to people based on the current models. And so I think we
Yeah.
really need legislation, and we really need policy changes about how water is managed in the West, where we're going to have things like the Great Salt Lake is drying up, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's, it's also not just important for the birds, but it's like hugely important for the local, regional, and global, I would say, climate and weather and economy and that sort of thing. So,
Sure.
um, so anyway, I am spending a lot of time at the Great Salt Lake trying to take these pictures that do some small, piece of capturing its sort of magnificence and its extremeness, to try and to sort of build awareness. Um, I started thinking about how does one do conservation photography, and I approached a local bird preserve and um, talking to them. They wanted very specific things, and as I was kind of talking and reading and learning about it, I realized, well, this is like really hard.
Yeah.
Like a career.
Yeah.
People spend their lives figuring out how to do effective, conservation photography and photojournalism, right?
Sure.
Um, and this isn't something that I know how to do. Um, and so, but that's kind of what I want to do in the next phase, right? So that's sort of the project that I'm working on, is dipping my toes the tiniest little bit
Yeah.
into how to do conservation photojournalism, how to take a picture that I think is pretty and make it change somebody's mind or make it open somebody's eyes to a situation that they didn't know existed, and to do that in a way that isn't just so sad that
Yeah.
people
That
can't
that people
take.
kind of turn away, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and that engages them and involves them. And I don't know how to do it, but that's kind of what I'm working on. So I've been spending a lot of time out at the Great Salt Lake trying to capture, a body of images that I can share in some way that um, may hopefully help to stimulate change.
That's a wonderful concept. So, and I know we chatted about it the other day privately, and I cannot wait to see where that project leads you and what comes about of it, and in any timeline, because I know it's not anything that's going to be like, oh, let's see what you got next month, like that's not how this sort of thing tends to work. And from my perspective, going after something like that, which I have no experience doing either, but I could see like the one thing that stands out to me that would probably be of utmost importance is variety in the photography aspect of things, right? Because I think while yes, there do exist single photos that have incredible impact, that is such a rarity. But I do more often see collections of photos that can easily have much more impact than a single photo can do when they all have a common theme or a common thread to them. And I think that concept of working on it photographically in that respect changes the game of your approach overall versus I just want to go out and make one pretty photo that I can share online, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been sort of thinking and pondering on what does that body of work look like. And of course, yeah, what you said is, I think, correct. It's got to have variety. It's got to touch on some specific themes that aren't things that I've thought much about, like what about the human element, right?
Yeah.
Got to have a human element. You got to appeal to people
Mm-hmm.
and what people do in their daily lives. Um, you probably need more than like a 500 millimeter f4, lens too. Right?
Oh, so I see. This is a nice roundabout way to figure out how to buy more gear. Nicely done, Marianne.
I need a drone for sure.
Yeah. No.
Lake. Come on,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah. Exactly.